Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
In the UK, when we had the Paralympics, there was a thing called Channel 4 were the sponsors of the Paralympics for the TV broadcasting rights. They had the TV broadcasting rights, and they had a show which is worth looking at called, I'm trying to remember it, the left, hang on, let me just try and remember, I can't remember, Channel 4. Is it Left Foot? I can't remember. Last Leg, that's it, right, the Last Leg. So the Last Leg, if you're able to get hold of it, it's brilliant, right? So it's people with disabilities, and it's a comedy. So they are just laughing about what happens in the Paralympics, what happened that day, but also themselves. And I don't know if you're able to watch it here. I can probably show it to you because I can attach to a UCL VPN, so it looks like I'm in the UK. But the Last Leg is, honestly, it was absolutely brilliant. And Channel 4, that was their video for for Rio, was trying to change those attitudes towards disability and stop thinking. You saw that some people are using their feet to pay for parking or pay for petrol. Fine. But if it had been universally designed to be used with both, then you could have done both. So it was a bit of an ad hoc thing, but it's quite a good way to change the energy in the room, so it's good. Any thoughts or questions on that before I go back to the... Here you can see there's a section of slides on designing a screening tool. So the type of, I'd said that innovation doesn't have to be a product. So here is some work that we did with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine to develop a population health screening tool, which I can talk through. And then there's a little bit of stuff on prosthetics innovation in repair and life cycle analysis. And then there's some talk about how you get a prosthetic leg and some brainstorming around prosthetic legs. So there are 3 examples of innovation, if you like. Okay? Or we can do a deep dive into designing for one particular condition, which is motor neuron disease, ALS, so motor neuron disease. Does everybody know what motor neuron disease is? It's a degenerative condition that eventually attacks all of your muscles. So your brain functions perfectly, but you stop being able to do things. So initially, you normally can't start to use your hands. Then oftentimes you can't start to walk. Then eventually it gets your muscles for your breathing, and that's how you eventually die with it. So it's a degenerative condition that's not very nice, and it changes. It has different paces depending on the strain. And so I have a set of slides on learning about motor neuron disease, or ALS, and then all the different assistive technologies that are available. And then I've got a couple of bits about how people try to, how people design in this space. So I think we're not going to get through both. So we can either do this screening tool, which is what I was going to do, but I had a feeling at the end that maybe you might prefer the ALS stuff. So, don't know. Vote for screening tool. Vote for ALS. Okay, ALS is winning, but the screening tool I'll come back to. Okay, I'll weave it into tomorrow. I think it's only an order. It's not a. Okay, all right. So we'll do this then. So designing for ALS. So a lot of these slides. So Richard Cave is one of my PhD students, and for the last 3 years. We have delivered my module, which is a 10-week course in the second semester. We have terms, not semesters. There's a technical difference. I can never remember what it is. But the second term, we teach a 10-week course on disability interaction design. And the idea is that the students do the activity that you did last week, that co-design, but it's spread over a whole 10 weeks where they're working with a person with a disability. And for the last 2 years, we have dedicated the course to designing technologies for people with ALS or motor neuron disease. And so Richard gives the initial lecture on what is motor neuron disease because he is a speech and language therapist and he knows better than most what it is. And then I take over and run the design stage. So what I'm going to show you here is motor neuron disease, how it progresses, how the technology then has to progress through one use case, just one user. We follow one user. Then we're going to look at, you'll begin to get an idea that there's so many technologies you've got to keep track of that actually information seeking, just trying to find the information that you need is a problem. So then there's a few slides on information seeking, and then hopefully right at the end I'll be able to show you a couple of case studies of my students' work, so 2 videos that show you what the students came up with at the end of the sort of 10-week course when you design for ALS. So augmentative and alternative communication aids, they're the things that you've heard about before. They're unaided and aided methods to supplement or augment or replace alternative to natural speech. So they can be for any condition. You could be autistic and be non-verbal, or you might not have the functionality of speech, or you might have slurred speech, so you need someone to interpret it. Unaided means that you're using your body to communicate, for example, using facial gestures, body language and sign language. They would all be unaided. You're able to do them yourself. Aided means you need some tools, such as writing, pictures, voice output devices, that type of technology. Low tech can be really simple, like that sheet in the top right of just letters, and people just point to spell words. Or you can have like blocks for children as they're learning things to learn different words. Mid-tech normally need a power supply, but are normally quite simple. For example, just a button that you might press that's quite simple. High-tech are dedicated computer systems that cost a lot of money. So we know that 1.5% of the population needs these devices, and of that 1.5%, only 8% have access. So most people, 92% of people, don't get access. Proportions even lower in lower middle income countries, so they pretty much don't get anything. And that's generally due to lack of financing and ability and support for the middle and the higher end, and the lack of awareness in the lower end. People tend to pay out of pocket, so in high income countries, people have high disposable incomes, that's how they purchase things. But in low, and in the US, for example, you have Medicare and Medicaid. In Germany, you can get, it will cover the cost completely on Medicare. Or on the equivalent state thing. In the UK, it's similar. You can get it through the NHS, the augmented communication devices. But in other countries, it's not universally available, and it can be quite difficult to get. So when you're trying to fit an augmented communication device, it's really important to consider the needs of the person first, and then think about what tech can be useful for them. So you don't want to go in with the high tech first. It might not be needed. So you just need to understand what the person needs. Everybody has their own individual communication needs. Every single one of you communicates differently with everybody, and we communicate differently with different people, right? Like the way I will send a text to Sujatha would be different to the way I might send a text to my partner, which will be different to the way I might send a text when I'm introducing myself to somebody, you know? So they're going to have those differences, and some people will have a very wide range, some people are low range. So yeah, and also it will change in terms of the context, right? The same person, even, the different context will change. It also changes depending on where you are. So, you know, how you want to quickly send a tweet will be different to a work email, for example. And also there's how you communicate without talking. You know, there's a lot of things that are communicated by body gestures, by facial gestures. Like if I sit there, if you ask me a question, I immediately go, like, and then I go, oh, it's a really interesting question. Well, you don't believe I think that's a really interesting question, right? So there's a lot of communication that's not verbal. So the speed of your communication, see, I speak too quickly, and the speed of others can alter how you communicate. So a lot of times people with slurred speech or dysartic speech, you find that people try to like complete their sentences for them, but it's very frustrating. Like they want to say their whole sentence themselves. They don't want to start a sentence and then you finish it and it's nearly right, but then they have to try and correct you. So you find that, and also people can stop listening. Like I know I speak too quickly, but if I start talking too slowly, you stop. You begin to just start thinking of something else. So if you're working with people who can only get one word out, it's very hard, right? And then it's difficult for them to develop confidence and practice in overcoming a stutter or overcoming something because the reaction they're getting is poor. So the goal of AAC is to help people to communicate then what we should design and what to take into account of. And so just thinking about your course, this technology is technology, but there's also a whole load of other stuff that happens where speech and language therapists are trying to rehabilitate speech, trying to teach people, say after a stroke, how to breathe again, how to use your diaphragm, how to project voice. Like if you can't use one muscle in your face, how can you make that noise in a slightly different way? So that's all under rehabilitation, and a speech and language therapist will be very well skilled in doing those things. But then augmented communication can come in even when either the person's never going to regain that function, or whilst they're regaining the function, it can help them to communicate in the meantime. So we know, oops, the slide's gone a bit mad, that 80 to 95% of people living with MND will become unable to communicate their daily needs using natural speech. So we know that eventually your muscles will go. In time, most will be unable to speak at all. Up to 90% of PLWMLD means people living with motor neuron disease eventually rely on an AAC to support daily communication. Individual and social identity can be negatively affected. You get increasing social withdrawal and changes to speech associated with increasing negative perceptions by listeners. They think that the person is less likable, less intelligent and less trustworthy. A lot of people with ALS, when they go into a shop or something, that people think they're drunk. And that's like quite offensive. You're just trying to buy something and someone's treating you as if you're just a stupid drunk person. And so it's quite difficult to overcome. So over 80% of people with MND are affected by slurred speech, quiet speech, or increasing or complete speech loss. Okay? So we're going to go through this case study of Marianne, who hopefully will help you understand the sort of complexities of the condition. So Marianne is a 73-year-old living by herself. She's in her own apartment in London. She has a son who lives nearby. Her husband recently passed away, and because of the pandemic, she needs to stay at home as much as possible, as her age and medical condition make her vulnerable. Marianne speaks 3 languages fluently, and pre-COVID, loved to meet her friends for coffee and go to a play or to the opera. She is friendly, a very talkative person with a lot of life history. She moved to London from Germany in the 1960s and married her husband soon after. She often talks about how difficult it was back then due to overt racism and hostility towards them. She is white with a German accent and he was Indian. They spent many months just looking for an apartment to rent as many landlords refused to house them. She built a successful career in London, worked at a university for many years and has now retired. Marianne, who's hilarious and brilliant, by the way, you'll see her in a video later, was diagnosed with motor neuron disease in December 2019. It's also known as I can never say it properly, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, and it's a progressive, ultimately fatal disease causing progressive muscular weakness, resulting in loss of the use of hands, arms, legs, neck, and increasing breath weakness. The average life expectancy is 2 to 3 years once you have been diagnosed. And there's a 1 in 300 risk of getting MND across a lifetime. So it could affect adults of any age, but is more likely to affect people over 50. And MND affects up to 5,000 adults in the UK at one time. And currently there's no cure. And the only approved drug and currently only one approved drug that marginally slows the progression. Right? So once you're diagnosed, you know that you've got probably 2 to 3 years to live. And some of the people we've worked with over the last 2 or 3 years have come in each year. And like Mike, for example, who's a brilliant man, like each year he comes in to help students co-design. And each year when he first came in, he was talking. Then he came in, he's not talking, and now I can't understand him at all. Whereas before I could understand him, even when he was finding it quite difficult. So initially, as soon as Marianne was diagnosed, the speech therapist offered to voice bank her voice, and Marianne agreed to do this. And that's actually a very good video, which I can show you maybe at the break, of this new voice banking technology. So voice banking means you speak a series of phrases and some nice machine learning will then be able to use your voice in commands, in the AAC devices. Do you know Stephen Hawking's? Everyone heard Stephen Hawking's voice, but it was a very mechanical voice, right? So people want their own voice, so they bank it. When they still are able, they start making these phrases and they bank it so that voice can be put into the AAC devices. So voice banking creates a personalized synthetic voice, an approximation of the person's own voice that can be used in AAC and is argued to go some way to preserve a person's identity when their natural voice is lost, but there has been little supporting research. There's no research that's proven that, but anecdotally people are saying that. This personalized synthetic voice can be used in devices and apps as the voice of the software, and although a PSV may have a similar tone to natural speech, a PSV does not sound the same as how people communicate with natural speech. The tone of the PSV cannot be dynamically adjusted to indicate happiness, anger, sadness, irony, or sarcasm, to name a few examples. So at the moment, it's still quite mechanicized, but it is your voice. So initially, Marianne's voice became quieter and more slurred. So as someone who loved to talk, she felt her identity was significantly affected, and she worried that others would not understand her and chose not to call them as much as before. The pandemic had already isolated her physically, and MND was isolating her socially too. Her speech therapist provided her with a voice amplifier to increase the volume of her speaking. And increasing speech volume meant she was better understood for a while and augmented how she communicates. However, it was bulky and obvious to see, but she did feel better understood than not using it. But you can see it's quite a bulky device, right? You put it here and it's just a speaker. It's very low tech, just a speaker that will amplify. So transcribing her words, Marianne's speech became so slurred that unfamiliar listeners did not understand her, even with a voice amplifier. She enrolled in a project called Google Euphonia, and Google Euphonia project is something that Richard also worked on, and it's now become an app called Google Relate, and we've just tested it in Ghana, actually, with 20 participants. But she enrolled in this Google Euphonia research project to train a customized automated speech recognition model, an ASR model, that would transcribe her slurred speech and display words on a phone. So real-time speech transcription can help to augment natural speech and not replace it. And Euphonia has a high word error rate versus people with unimpaired speech using the Google Assistant. So it's going to get more words wrong than if you use Google Assistant and you just speak to it, right? And that's because it's still it's taking a voice that is much harder to hear. So Marianne is sensitive to other people's needs and wants her exact words transcribed and feels embarrassed or ashamed of the transcription when it's not always accurate. Marianne is also worried about technology and finds the research app quite difficult to use. Eventually, Marianne lost her voice. She could no longer speak to communicate as her muscles became too weak. As she still had movement in her hands, Marianne used an iPad with text-to-speech software to type messages that were said in her voice banked. So an example is Predictable. Predictable is an app. There's many other apps. You can see here it's £159, 160. It's an expensive app, right? And there's a few of them that are very expensive. But for her in London, that was affordable, and she paid £160 for this app. Typing a message with AAC is much slower than speaking. The average human speaking rate, I definitely beat this, but the average is 130 to 190 words per minute. Using AAC, it can range from 1 to 35 words per minute. So you really are beginning to lose people, especially because they then have to read, and they're waiting for the words, and then they're thinking, oh, I must collect the kids. I forgot to turn the oven off. What were you saying? And then you get another word, and then you get another word, and then you get another word, and eventually you have a sentence. Okay? For many people with MND, there is nothing that can replace the ease or speed of natural speech, citing the extended time it takes to spell a message with AAC. And AAC users often vocalize, and they try to use vocalizations and gestures to try to speed up communication. So the guy Mike that I was speaking to, like, he has some movement and he has some, I can only call them sounds. I don't know what he's saying, but his wife understands them, and she'll be able to translate that into, oh, he's just frustrated with the technology, don't worry. She's able to interpret that sound to mean something, but to me it's just, it could be you speaking a Hindi word. I have no idea what that means. Does that make sense? Even though he's communicating something. But over time, there have been, him and his wife, because they live together, obviously, she's learnt that. So then eventually Marianne can't use her hands. So the SLT, the speech and language therapist, provided a gyroscopic mouse attached to her glasses to access a computer to type messages. This is quite an expensive and specialist tool, but Marianne was able to access the web and email using this device. Marianne eventually found it too difficult to reliably use her hand, and this specialist AAC team were providing eye-gaze control devices. So Marianne required ongoing support to position and calibrate the eye-gaze device, and it constantly needed updates or repair, which often took time. The eye-gaze AAC equipment is specialist, it's often expensive, and it really does require additional support. So Mike's AAC device, you see this device down here? It's not the one that Mike was using, but on his device, like I said the other day, this was the enter button and this was the delete button, and he's controlling that with his eyes. And like the error, every now and then he'd delete a word when he meant to, and that's when she would say, oh, don't worry, that noise means he's getting frustrated with with the technology. But they told us this story of that it wouldn't, to add a custom card, so you'd have your own words. Like you might have a word for your daughter that's not their name. It's just something that you call them. Or you have a word for, I don't know, dinner. Like dinner in our house, I would call it dinner. My partner would call it tea. Because one grew up in Ireland and one grew up in the north of England. And we have a slightly different word for the same thing, right? But you might want to add that. But you can't just add it yourself. They have to send an engineer to come and plug in a system so that you can add it. So it was never designed that the user could have any form of adaptability because they are convinced that the user will break it. But of course, if you design, it's ridiculous. Someone's life expectancy is 2 years and they're going to need this AAC device for maybe 6 months. And it's going to take 3 weeks for an engineer to come and see them. That it really is quite soul destroying for the person. They just can't in any way adapt to these things. So eye gaze AAC is bulky. It cannot be used in places like a shower, for example, room or outside in the rain. It doesn't work. Many can't be used in direct sunshine either. Often the device does not get taken with a person in the event of an emergency because it's too bulky. So they're left without any communication aid. So Google have developed a free Android app called Look to Speak. And it tracks eye movement from the phone camera and allows selection of customized phrases to be spoken using a voice bank. The goal is for easy and quick basic communication when the main eye gaze system is not available or from a phone. Now, the examples that we're giving here are Google, partly because Richard does 4 things. He works for the MND Association, he's a speech and language therapist. He does 1 day a week with Google, and he does 2 days a week on his PhD with us. He's just one of those people. He's older than me. He's done a PhD at the end of his sort of working career, if you like. And he's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. But what we're seeing the difference there is this technology is what I would call an assistive technology. It's very standard assistive technology. You can see that there's a lot of gatekeepers to that assistive technology. There's a speech and language therapist, that's a gatekeeper. Then there's the engineers that have to come out, that's a gatekeeper. Then often you have to go back to the speech and language therapist, that's a gatekeeper. Alternatively, this is an accessible or universally designed tool. This is a piece of accessible software, it does act in some ways as an assistive technology, but it's meant to be that anybody could use it. There might be times when you don't want to speak and you just want to point and you could use it. Does that make sense? So it's beginning to cross that line between assistive technology and accessibility, and we're seeing that a lot in the digital space. What's interesting though is that some of these digital things that are coming up, they don't realize that they are actually an assistive technology. And just when they go to launch, it happened to Microsoft. So Microsoft's a big company, and with their product Seeing AI, which is an app where you point and it will tell you what the screen is. When they first went to release that, it got released in the US, and it was delayed and delayed and delayed with release in the UK. And the reason was the UK authorities classified it as an assistive technology, which means it needed MHRA approval, and of course they could do that, but they just had thought it was an accessible technology. They didn't think it was an assistive technology, and it just delayed the release, which is fine for a company like Microsoft, but if you were a startup, that release date could really kill you. So you have to be a bit careful if you're developing an accessible solution, that it doesn't, if it's crossing, have a conversation early on with those regulatory authorities so you know what data you should be collecting so that you can get the approval. Anyway, back to AAC. So in summary, AAC devices for people living with MND and many other conditions have not changed much in decades. Many do not meet the needs of people living with ALD, so the speed, accuracy, reliability, availability, cost, none of it is accessible. Many are built on specialist devices that require specialist support. The co-development of solutions with persons living with MLD is less common, especially for those that cannot talk to communicate. As speech has lost, the social networks of people living with MND fall away. Education on how MND affects communication, how to talk to somebody using AAC, and initiatives to build back social networks are needed. And mobile phones are ubiquitous and increasingly capable of substituting some of these specialized assistive technologies. So AAC is an area where accessible technology is replacing some of those assistive technologies. So as you can imagine, if you're a person living with MLD, you might spend a lot of time, imagine you go to doctors, you go through lots and lots of different tests, and eventually they say, I'm really sorry, I've got this awful diagnosis, but you've got ALS, you've got MND. And normally when you speak to people, it's like dementia. Normally the clinicians go one of 2 ways. They tend to either give you all of the information you'll ever need, which is, this is what you need to do today, this is what's going to happen, this is how you write a will, this is how you should die. right? And you just leave going, oh my God. Or they give you very little information. They tell you, don't worry, the physiotherapist or somebody will be in contact. And clinicians tend to fall into one of those two camps. So initially, people do a lot of information seeking. They start Googling, what is this condition? And then something starts to happen, their arm starts to not work, or they start to try to find what's happening, what technology can help us. So trying to then scaffold, so we did quite a lot of research on how you scaffold information, like how do people seek information? Does that make sense? How do we then develop efficient seeking agents for people? So you know what assistive technology is, you know what an assistive product is, but just because I haven't defined it before, accessibility is the provision of flexibility to accommodate each user's need and preferences. It makes mainstream products and services usable to as many people as possible without requiring specialist equipment. Okay? And so all of these, you could have physical products at the top, such as wheelchairs, hearing aids, prostheses. That's a type of assistive technology, an assistive product. You might have digital forms, like those AAC devices we saw. They're assistive technologies. And you can also have adaptations to the physical environment. All of those can be assistive products, right? They're all things that can be assistive to people. So the first thing we want to think about is who are the people that might search for information? So obviously there's people with a disability, the person who's just been told they've got ALS or motor neuron disease. You've got people with disabilities first off. Now, you've got people with disabilities who would search for stuff. You've also then got people who acquire a condition like MND, and all of a sudden they need to now know information. They don't have the same social infrastructure as a person who's lived with who's grown up with a disability. If you've grown up with a disability, you probably know a local NGO, you know other people, and so you've got a different ecosystem of information seeking. You've got people with conditions such as diabetes, stroke, cancer. You've got family members and friends. You've got caregivers, health and social care professionals, organising or representing people with disabilities, government officials, entrepreneurs, academics and students, and more. So there's a lot of people that might be searching for information. So first thing is, what are they searching for? Well, we go through this cycle, the information journey, sense-making cycle, and normally people, you figure out who they are, you need to recognise what their need is, and each of those user groups will have a slightly different need. So the clinicians might be looking for new evidence of new products or new clinical trials to understand, can they change any of their provision pathways? Caregivers might just be looking for, how do I live with somebody like this? Like what emotional support's available to me? Whereas a person living with a device might need, well, I want a new device. So you need to recognise their need. Then they go searching for finding information. So there's active searching, or there's encountering information, right? I don't know how many of you just see a poster and realise there's a new product, or you're in a cafeteria, somebody, you overhear something, and you can be told, from word of mouth, but that's all quite fragmented. They're all over the place. So this is how people are currently finding information. Then they need to validate or interpret that information. So two of you could tell me, God, you should definitely use this device, and you're telling me I should definitely use that device. I don't know who to trust, and I don't know whether it will fit my needs. So you've got to validate and interpret information, and we do this all of the time. We get information, two different news sources. Which one do you believe? Does that make sense? And for different reasons, different people will believe different news sources. So how information is presented and to whom, that will make a difference. Some users might have limited prior knowledge and find it difficult to understand or validate information. So people aren't going to understand clinical trials. That's not going to be a thing you understand at that point in time. You've also got to remember that when you've suddenly got a diagnosis like that, you're in a state of shock. You're in that sort of fight or flight mode. You're not relaxed and able to take in lots of complex things. You're just searching desperately for an answer. And then you've got to try and use the information. So you want to do something with the information. I now know this is the product I want. Okay, now I want to use it. So I want to tell somebody, I might want to share it, or I might make a purchase, for example. And so this entire circle, this sort of information journey, sense-making, there's loads of research on this, right? So loads and loads of people, their entire careers are based on how do people search information on the web, what do we do with it, how do we make sense of information, the psychology of how you present information. There's been loads of studies done on things like critical, neonatal care, like just a design interface of a machine that's keeping a baby alive. If I'm a nurse and I'm in the middle of a series of button presses that will program this machine for the next 24 hours, and suddenly something happens over there, a machine goes off and the baby is critically ill. So I run across over there. When I come back to this device, I have to be able to pick it up from exactly where I was. I can't make a mistake. So how you design that interface, so it's that sort of, is completely foolproof. All of those types of things people spend lifetimes dedicating things to. And so this particular sense-making thing, recognizing the need, finding information, validating, interpreting information, as you do that, your need evolves because you learn more, and maybe you realize, oh, there's a whole thing of categories that I now know about. So how am I going to speak when I lose my voice? And then I realize there's AAC devices. Oh, so now I'm saying, I've got a different need. Now I want to know what's the best AAC device. And then I find more information, and then I realize I can't get half the devices in India. So now my need is updated to, I want an AAC device I can get in India. And you sort of go around this cycle. And so there's various traditions that you can look up, but the common characteristic is this interplay that occurs between top-down and bottom-up processing all of the time. We're taking top-down information, but we're also experiencing our life, and that's informing our need as well. So we're constantly going between these two places. So if you want to design something that helps people better understand information, you have to think about that bi-directional sense-making process. So in one hand, you've got these challenges in reality. So people are sense-making, and it's inherently difficult to track. So if you're a user, if you're a designer, and your job is to design a new web platform for, I don't know, the Kerala state or for the Indian government, and the Indian government would like a platform where people could understand what assistive technology they might need, where they can purchase it, who they get it from, how it all works, right? If you want to design that very well for users, you would need to know how people are sense-making in their everyday. So how do we know where they are along the journey? But that's so difficult for you to understand because you've got no way of getting that information, right? They're just living their life and they just interface with your portal on a very short piece. So much sense-making research has been done in domains where gathering that level of detail is like impossible. So intelligent analysis or legal work, like trying to understand how people are making sense of legal documents, things like that, it's very difficult, right? Then you need methods for finding out about the sense-making process. So here there has been methods. So we've done interviews, have been high level, gathering as much detail as possible, but accepting limitations. So you've got these micro-moment timeline interviews where you try to understand, if you're doing Google search, or I did an eye tracking study once of people back, probably 2001, I did an eye tracking study as my final year project. So to understand how people navigated websites. Now back then websites were still relatively new, so trying to understand how you should design interfaces with, say, a banner at the top or things down the side, and how many levels of information people would remember before they would forget. Does that make sense? So should you have more information on the front page, or should you only have 3 levels deep, or where will people get lost? So you can ask people as they do a task, you can interview them as they're doing it to really understand where they get lost. You can ask each respondent to detail what happened in a situation step by step. For each step, ask the respondent what questions she had or he had and what things she or he needed to find out, learn, understand, resolve, make sense of, and respond how the respondent tried to address each step. So figure out what did they do when the system didn't work for them. You can also do think aloud, so people just talk as they're using a system. There's also this thing called Peter's information journey, where Peter's information journey, just to give you an idea of how he makes sense when we were looking at this with Peter, was over on the right-hand side, you'll see that Call Scotland have very helpfully made a circle of all of the iPad apps for complex communication support needs. So if you're a mother or a father, your child, you've just realised your 4-year-old is not able to speak properly, they're not hitting their development targets, they need some form of AAC device. And you go into Google, you will find that many applications. And so you as a parent have to go, wow, there's all of these things, I don't know what they do. What do you do? Look at user reviews? It's a bit different though, isn't it? Like choosing a book on Amazon, it's a low risk if it's 5 stars or 4 stars, right? I mean, what's the worst that happens? You don't finish a book. But choosing the application for your child to learn, it's quite a difficult thing. So you've recognised this need. Peter is a person with MND in this situation, whose speech slurs and symptoms worsen over time. How does he seek information about these AAC apps? Where or when should the NHS provide it? How do we get this information in his degenerative journey? He's going to degenerate. When should information, say, from an app be sent back to the NHS so that they can realise this app no longer works and we need to issue a new app because his condition has changed? Does he or his carer search for this information? That's another question you might need to ask yourself. And that can change the fact, that's why right at the very beginning we said you need to get to know the person. Different families have different dynamics. Sometimes they're based on gender, sometimes they're not. So sometimes your stereotypical map might not be what's happening, and so it might be that he's never going to look himself. It's his wife or his partner or his carer. How does he compare all the apps and make a decision? And how does he find the information in the app? Like once he goes into the app, how does that work? And all of those questions as a designer are sort of what we're trying to ask ourselves when we're building these information systems. But not even if we're building an app, just even as a person who's building a care pathway. These are the types of things we need to think about, because finding information drives decision making. And so people need access to the right information at the right time for us to make the right decision about their care pathway. So there's also this idea of collaborative information seeking and sense making. So it's an evolving term, and it starts with synchronous and asynchronous use of search engines, and now it's across platforms or tools. But basically it's collaborative sense making is common in military command, firefighting, rescue operations and healthcare. So if you're going into a burning building and you're all seeing different elements of the burning building, then together you make a collective decision on whether this building is going to collapse and you should all get out, or whether you should still fight the fire, right? So these areas of collaborative information seeking and analysing how people communicate with each other in those critical times have helped to develop this theory. But we don't know how collaboration takes place in information seeking on assistive technology. We're not sure yet how that works. So when did this study, and some of those slides that I've just presented earlier, some were inputs from Wen and also from Professor Anne Blanford, who's done a lot more work on information seeking than me. But what we found is that there's a massive gap in HCI to examine, so human-computer interaction, to examine the information behaviour in relation to assistive technology or people with disabilities. So we tried to look, like we were going to publish a paper, but there was no data. It's almost nothing to publish. Like literally, if you look at information seeking, collaborative information seeking, information sense making in HCI, there's entire journals, there's whole tracks, thousands of papers. And then you just add the words assistive technology or disabled people, and it's like, there are 10. There are 10 papers. So a few papers study caregivers, a few papers look at maybe the caregiver's role in information seeking, but there's very little research on collaborative information seeking and sense making. And if there is any, it's just focused on older people or visual impairments, and normally just on a very simple task, like how a series of blind people interact with one another. So what we are seeing, though, is that of the very few papers that exist, people with disabilities either are searching for the first theme is around discussing user information needs. So the paper studies what information users search for in the paper. Examining information source, so trying to understand or validate the sources of information. That's another thing that they search for. But most are seeking information on strategies of behaviour, like what should I be doing? What should I do, basically? I basically think in disability, when you get something like a progressively degenerating disease, it comes down to two questions. What can I do now? And what can I do next? That's what people want to know. They just want to know, how can I maximize what I have now, and what's going to be the next thing I lose that I can begin to plan for. So some of the papers looked at how can processes be more accessible. So some people said an AT information portal, or maybe they evaluate web accessibility, because a lot of the platforms aren't accessible, hilariously. Fix or improve the technology, understand search behavior, understand user information needs. So we looked at this for people with ALS, and we found that there were three. So we looked at people with information need overview was the biggest ranked challenge, because people with ALS, their symptoms quickly deteriorated. They needed to know quickly what the thing they needed next was. So there was one paper that looked at this, and there was basically three styles of information seeking behaviour. You've got active seekers, selective seekers, and information avoiders. So active seekers obtained information from various sources on their own, so they just go off and find it. Selective seekers have access to information but frequently used intermediaries to filter out the information, so they might trust a particular forum or a particular website. And they would go to those periodically to look, but they wouldn't look anywhere else. Information avoidance used so avoidance behaviours, they commonly use intermediaries to pre-screen information. So by that I mean that, let's say you want to search, but I'm the one who does the search for you, and then I decide to filter what I tell you. I don't want to tell you how bad it is, so I filter that information, so people can filter the information. You also get unsolicited information, so you know that thing where everyone has an opinion on something you should do. Do you know, like, I don't know, always happens to new mothers generally. They have a baby and everybody has an opinion on how they should, whether their baby should be allowed to cry themselves to sleep, or whether you should go in and put your hand on it, or whether you shouldn't, or whether, like everyone has an opinion, whilst you have absolutely no energy to take in anybody's opinion. But yeah, people like to give opinions on things, and so it's a problem. So the other thing, though, is that, sorry, the slides have gone slightly strange today. Emotions affect information-seeking behaviours. So if you're feeling really depressed and hopeless, how you receive information is different, but also how you'll seek the words that you'll use will be different. So we started to think, how can we present timely information to reflect readers' emotional states and tailor for content accordingly to make it easier for people to understand. So we came up with some personas. Newly diagnosed person, slowly progressing, advanced, caregiver, family member and friend, but not the caregiver, and professionals. So when we talk to people, you hear, this is someone who's newly diagnosed. There's a quote from someone who's newly diagnosed. It says, "I'm a deer in the headlights. I try not to let myself think about that route of why me, because there are no answers. It feels like even the docs have nothing for me. I've been given a horrible death sentence." So you imagine that's your energy around something. So the emotions there are disbelief, denial, people are shocked. The information needed, they need to know more about ALS and MND. They need information on treatment therapies and costs, and also on different organisations or local communities that can help, because what the person needs there is a social structure that will help them live a positive next 2 years of their lives. And they're also going to need mental health support and personal welfare. The slowly progressing, a quote from one of the participants was, "Cancer is a disease you can fight, but there's no surviving ALS. Now that I've accepted that, it's about living the life I know I have left to live." I mean, you see that a lot. There's this period, it's like the stages of grief. You're angry, you're frustrated, you're hopeless, but then at some point you think, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to maximise, I'm going to really do something with my life. At that point, the emotions of acceptance, they become more frustrated with not being able to find information. They begin to get a bit annoyed that why isn't this information available to me? They're very, very grateful for support groups. They just love their support groups. What they're desperate for is information on trials. Anybody with ALS is desperate to undertake a trial. They will do anything because they're desperate to try and help advance the science and the engineering. They want information on the right AT. They get very frustrated with all the wrong information out there. They want information on AT resources and cost, information on emerging AT and how to use them, and information on community support, but specifically still need mental health support. They need ways to track their changing symptoms and to know what does that mean, because it can be scary, and some symptom changes maybe are less scary than others, but you can worry about all of them equally. You need support of good and emerging AT, and beginning to maybe get some spiritual support, because you are getting to the point of the end of your life. Once it's advanced, you have people saying, well, people living with ALS are like brothers in arms fighting the same enemy. It's an amazingly close community of people. Once you get into that community, they're wonderful people to design with, because they have such energy and passion against the disease. So they're like, they genuinely are like these fighters. They are an invaluable source of advice because they've actually lived it. The more info, the better for me. I know I don't have much time left, so it's critical that I'm able to make the right decisions in a timely manner. So at that point, their world's closing in. They begin to start to worry about their families. They're still very grateful for the support group. The information need, they're still desperate for trials. They want to do more trials, test more emerging AT. They want the right AT, but they also start to need palliative care. Someone needs to start giving them the right information about end-of-life care. And they sort of get to that point where they want information of everything, because they're in this fight mode. They want to fight the whole thing, the whole ecosystem. Definitely needs mental health support. They need mental health support for the families. At this point, the person will most likely still not be able to speak. They'll begin to not be able to move. They'll begin to not have bladder control, bowel control. Everything's going to be quite challenging. And because we do link a lot of personality with how we speak, how we move, you're seeing the person you love slowly die. It's very hard. It's almost harder to watch if you're the person, the caregiver, or the partner. And they want to, but at this stage they want to contribute. They are in a stage generally where they are desperate to help anything and anything get to the best. For the caregivers at this point, it's like, it's not her, it's the ALS. I just have to remember that. It's so easy to feel like my needs don't count. I feel guilty even thinking that I need time and space to take care of myself when she's the one suffering. So you begin to have people, just that horrible mix of guilt where 90% of your need, the person that you love is no longer able to give you anything. And you have to give everything to them. And at some point, that will become frustrating. Like, you do need just a night's sleep, or you do need just to be able to take a shower. And yet again, you can't, and you've got the kids coming home, and there's other things happening. And so it's a very challenging space. They are completely overwhelmed and burnt out, emotionally and physically. They will have no sleep. They'll have a lot of challenges every day, and each day they will have been firefighting, and they'll have gone beyond their ability to give, and they're still giving. So what they need is information on the changing symptoms, especially, because they can get very scared with the changing symptoms. If it comes suddenly when you're very tired, and then all of a sudden your partner collapses, that you didn't know their legs were going to go next. You didn't know that they weren't. You wake up one day and they can no longer speak. Yesterday they could say some words. You wake up, they can't say any words, and you're then lying there thinking, that's the last time he ever spoke to me, or she ever spoke any words to me with her, their own voice. And it's emotionally quite disturbing. But if you knew it was coming, it would be easier to accept. So you get professionals. The professionals at this stage are, so every person who works with people with ALS or motor neuron disease are frustrated all of the time. They are battling services and procedures that just are not fit for purpose. So they're desperately trying to get a new wheelchair, to go from a manual wheelchair to an electric wheelchair. And by the time the electric wheelchair comes, the person can no longer use a joystick. So now they've got a piece of kit taking up room in their very small residence that they can't even use, and then they're fighting to get the joystick replaced. But if you replace a joystick on an electric wheelchair without the manufacturer doing so, you invalidate the warranty. So you invalidate the warranty, so either you take that risk or you don't do it, but now we need to add eye gaze. So you're either hacking a piece of machinery that's only going to be used for 3 months that then can't be used for anybody else because you've invalidated the warranty, or you're waiting another 3 months, by which time they're not going to be able to use it anyway. So, and they're coming to see these clients, they're watching caregivers burn out, so they're just very frustrated. They again need changing symptoms. They'd love to know, like, to be able to track. You were talking about sensors and nanotech sensors and things. Everybody would love a sensor that would just begin to track the progression of this disease so that it could give real-time feedback to everybody, so that everybody could then issue things in a more instant way. But they don't have that. They have to keep visiting, but not be able to help, and then leave, and then not be able to help. So it's very project. So that comes to, like, what AT products can fit with the user needs. So it'd be great that before you got there, you would know what the things were, and you could arrive with some technology for people that they could try, for example. It would be great if that technology was actually adaptable and not so proprietary that you couldn't get into it. And they also just are desperately trying to understand the full lived experiences of people, and oftentimes they've got very small interactions, and it's quite difficult to get a full picture of someone's life. So if you put all that together, we end up with these sort of 4 big themes. One is information on ALS, is treatment, trials, appropriate, and like which are good trials and what are good and appropriate ATs. So everybody, apart from clinicians, really need that, because the clinicians do that. The mental health and spirituality work is needed for everybody as well, so newly diagnosed, slowly progressing advanced caregivers. Information on changing symptoms and right and new AT support are needed after you need to get used to the diagnosis first, but afterwards you need that, but you also, the clinicians need it. And just information, like systems that would communicate this information between all of those bits, rather than it being so siloed, would be great. So maybe MND, just thinking about this, the fact it's a rapidly progressively decreasing disease. It weakens the muscles that help people walk, chew, swallow, breathe, and we do need this assistive tech to improve the quality of life. So one piece of work that was done recently, it was one of our master's students that did this piece of work, but she started trying to understand. She analysed 153 posts that were on social media on blogs and forums. And she tried to understand what are the prompts to seek information, because if you're developing a system, you need to know what's the input, what's the prompt. So the first theme was researching ATs before acquisition. The second theme was consulting issues relating to ATs adaptation. And the third was more the ecological, so the financial support or trying to get the used products because you couldn't afford the more expensive ones. And so she came up with this idea of like this multidisciplinary care. So how do we get nursing, speech and language, neurology, AT, occupational health therapy, research team, dietitians, respiratory and respiratory therapy all working in cohesion? Because at the moment the person with ALS is individually going to each and every one. Yeah, and in all of that, we began to also look at how people in low and middle income countries would begin to look at that. So here are some examples of information sites which exist. They're not necessarily for ALS, but you've got atvisor.ai, which uses AI to assist you in getting your assistive technology. There's the EASTIN, which is European Assistive Technology, I forget what the IN stands for, Industry Network, I think. GATE, we're beginning to develop something with the WHO GATE people, which will also use AI to recommend products. And there's also Open Assistive, which is more of a DIY community of assistive technology that you can use. The AI one uses AI for user customization, provides AT resources. It goes end to user, to professionals, to supplier. There's no real explanation about the product or the symptoms supported. It just tells you about assistive technology. Whereas the EASTIN provides information and resources for professionals. It's a very detailed product and it's really dry. I mean, it's just like reading product specification pages. So it's fine if you're an AT professional or an engineer, but beyond that, you'd never look at it. Yeah, and the OpenAI one is open source. So across all of these platforms, what we find is that most of the platforms actually weren't fully accessible. So by that I mean screen reader users that weren't usable. They often use a lot of high bandwidth, which makes them not very good for low and middle income countries. They're difficult to understand, like they're just really dry. Like who wants to read product specifications? I mean, not really, like especially when you're searching for information about a condition. Heavily text-based, which is hard for a lot of people to quickly consume. Confused target audience. Nearly all of them have multiple target audiences and therefore don't really cater for any one very well. There's a lack of expert reviews and definitely a lack of patience. When you talk to people, they say they value other people's opinion, but there's no other people's opinion. And most people are unaware they exist anyway. Did you know they existed? No. So it almost doesn't matter that they exist because nobody knows they exist anyway. So it's quite hard. So this lecture, or the talk that I just gave, is well, it's taken from 3 different talks that make up the start of my module, little bits of each of them for the first 3 weeks. We normally go into more detail on sort of each bit, and we have more examples, and we do some activities. And then the students have 10 weeks to work with somebody with ALS to design for them. So I'm going to do this video first, which was, they have a very open scope, my students. It's just my nature. I don't like to give very concrete problems, because I think defining a problem is one of the hardest skills you're going to get. And if I give you the problems, then when you go out by yourself, you're still waiting for somebody to give you a problem. So as hard as it is to come up with it yourself, I want you to try. And I'll spend 3 weeks with you, helping you, but I just want you to do that. So this is what the students came up with, one group of students came up with.
Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis is a highly progressive neurodegenerative disease characterized predominantly by motor neuron damage leading to progressive muscle weakness. Diana received her first ALS diagnosis in 2019, and it has affected her life and bodily functions such as independence, mobility, and breathing. However, the current assistive technology could not provide them with sufficient support. Thus, in this module, our group and Diana worked together to explore possible solutions through co-design sessions. With UCL's ethical approval, we conducted semi-structured interviews with Diana via Teams. As Diana mentioned,
I'm on the ventilator about 21 hours a day.
The ventilator impacts her life mostly. To address the ventilator issues, we've done user interviews, literature reviews, and market research. The present NIV mask without sufficient comfort level could not provide a healthy data record and analysis function during using. To improve this, we tried to redesign the existing NIV mask and built a new digital health service. Starting with sketches, Diana gave us feedback.
Doesn't matter whether it goes on first or last, the glasses have got to go down to the skin. The back of the mask looks very boring. Doesn't look very interesting.
To resolve these, we did ergonomic test, and the results show that trapezoid and double straps can help relieve the pressure of the mask on the head without restricting her from wearing glasses. A replaceable headband can adjust size without hurting hair while playing a decorative role. Ayana also recommended us.
Yeah, you could have an alternative to Velcro. Could be a magnet.
Based on the feedback, we made this NIV mask design. As for the digital health part, a data record system for the Vivo 2 was designed to record and evaluate data for users and doctors, providing services of digital health and telemedicine. There are 4 features: health information section, health tracking section, telemedicine section, and profile section. When abnormal data appears, the system will have an alarm and user can choose whether to call the emergency contact. 5 kinds of data that can be tracked in the health tracking section. Besides, the users can consult doctors online and track their medication. We also take Diana's Apple Watch usage into consideration and design for it. We added low blood oxygen alerts and medication reminders to the iWatch. Finally,
Excellent. Wow, you have been busy.
Diana is happy with our final design based on our co-design, which meets her expectations. Thanks to Diana and every member who contributed to this co-design session.
How much time did they have?
So they have 10 weeks. There was one of the, sorry, the slides have gone. Yeah, they have 10 weeks to do the, 10 weeks to design and start. So a lot of the classes are, yes. So the first 3 weeks tend to be quite information heavy, like those lectures. You know, it's quite like the lecture I gave in day 1, and then these, you know, it's quite heavy. And then we have from sort of weeks 4 to 9, it's more people like more studio based. You know, they've done some things, like they'll have been told, okay, this week you should definitely get in contact with your, you know, the person that you're designing for, how, you know, get an initial set of requirements, and initially they'll come back with like some whiteboards, like they might have done it on Miro, or they might have done it physically with post-it notes, and they'll have like, you know, so for example with Diana, remember the first sketch of that, and it was Diana, because the ventilator is a problem, but actually there was also a problem with something else, and I can't remember all of them, but there was about 4 different problem areas, and then we worked with them to think, well, you know, which one is most, and I think which problem you solve is partly personal, it partly depends on the skills. So on that particular team there was 2 engineers from mechanical engineering, and then there were 2 people that came from computer science. So one wanted very much, 2 really wanted to do the digital health thing, and 2 really wanted to do a physical prototype. So the oxygen thing allowed them to do both. Does that make sense? So it was partly to do with their needs, but the initial needs had come from the person. So yeah, they get to then do that, and then we have a day normally where we try to have all of the people come in. So all of the people with ALS come in together. They love that because they love to meet each other. So it's a nice, you know, we pay for their taxis, we pay for lunch for everybody, but they don't get paid to be participants in the class. They're not paid for that, but they don't incur any costs. But they tend to really enjoy it anyway. It's a whole day. They stay afterwards for lunch. They stay in the lab with the PhD students just talking. A lot of the master's students stay for the afternoon because they don't have class that afternoon, the way my day works. And then they'll do a lot of the sort of, a little bit of co-design. The only thing they're not allowed to do with the ethics is they're not allowed to go to their home. The risk assessment won't allow us to let them go to their home. So if the people need to come back, that's fine. We have a budget for taxis for people to come back, and they can come back. And then we pay for them all to come back at the very end for a big celebration where all the videos are shown. And then we have like food afterwards, and you know there's some people from Google and Microsoft, and we have some like VIP guests that come to see the showcase. And so I just want to check. I thought I put a second video in.
When you come to work.
So this was the second video I was just going to show you quickly, if that's all right. This was just a different. I thought they were in the other order, so just forgive me because this one is a little bit more information seeking, and I was going to say there's information seeking and then there's product design, but it's gone the other way around. But it should be okay.
At 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, you haven't got energy. You want anything more simple, right? You want to get information quickly with less effort.
After someone is diagnosed with MND, technology to facilitate communication
potential. When an issue arises with this technology, how do people get support in a way that fits their needs? We turn to Carlos for answers, a technology expert with over 20 years experience in the fintech industry. He spoke to us about his first-hand experience with M&D and how he would design a platform that linked people with M&D to people who could help. Afterwards, we came up with 4 design ideas for an ideal platform. First, we envisioned a community support network. Another idea was a social networking platform. There was also an AI chatbot that generated quick and accurate responses. Last was a platform that connects people with M&D to technical experts who would come to their house in person to address issues including troubleshooting, facilitating free trials, and more. We went on to share these ideas with Carlos, who was most enthusiastic about the final idea.
I wish I had that 3 years ago. I think that is something that is so necessary. I think that one point of communication and support with tech-savvy people, volunteers, will be tremendously helpful. I mean, tremendously helpful.
After selecting the best design idea with Carlos, we gathered ideas and brainstormed about the potential features according to his user needs. Each of us did crazy eights of the potential interfaces, and we compared them to decide which designs were most in line with our requirements.
So pause it. Crazy eights is you get a piece of paper, fold it in half lengthways, fold it in half, and then fold it in half. You end up with 8 squares. You have a problem statement. Someone says something like, I want to get access to information, and then you turn it into a how might we question. How might we solve problem X? And then you have 8 minutes, and in each minute you have to draw a solution in each square. And the idea is it's meant to make you just rapidly come up with ideas and stop your brain going, oh, that's a stupid idea. I can't say that. That's stupid. That's stupid. That's stupid. So it forces you to do that. And so you quickly can iterate. And then the idea is normally that you put those ideas up on a wall or something, and then people can vote on the different ideas. And sometimes the really mad ideas is the one that wins, but you probably wouldn't have said it if you hadn't had that sort of that impetus. And sometimes you can set up a timer, and it's quite fun because you're looking around to see if everyone else has done them. So yeah.
We created low-fidelity prototypes to show Carlos. Our key takeaways from this feedback were: make it easy to select with eye gaze by increasing size of buttons and spacing on page. Keep the layout simple, but not dull. Use vetted helpers to ensure safety. Display price upfront. Incorporating these into our final design, we created M&D Assist. Let's say Carlos is experiencing an issue with customizing his Group 3 device. Depending on his current condition, M&D Assist gives Carlos the choice to speak, type, or select Group 3 from popular categories on the app. He is then guided through a short questionnaire to match him to the correct tasker based on his identified problem, any manual handling that might be involved in the task, extra details about the task, his task budget, and task location from viewer-saved addresses. M&D Assist then displays nearby taskers that Carlos can view or message for further information. Once a suitable tasker is found, an in-person appointment can be made by selecting the time, agreeing to the terms and conditions, and confirming. Using the Task tab, Carlos can view and reschedule upcoming tasks or leave reviews on completed tasks.
I really like what you showed today. Something I could use tomorrow right now. So well done, guys.
So yeah, that's just 2 videos. So that I've got 10 others. They're all going to go up on the website. Myself and Sujata are developing this IIT Innovation Portal. And one of the things that I think over the last few years we've done a very good job of is user-centered design in my module. I think the students do a great job. But at the end, where do the ideas go? Some of them want to try and develop them, but there's no pathway. So we want to try and put these ideas up on a portal so that people can take them and run with them, because we want that idea of open innovation to be there. So we've now got, I think, 20 videos that we can start with, and then hopefully we'll do some collaborations here, and we'll get another 20 videos. And so eventually we'll get a lot of very user-based design needs and some ideas of the prototypes, and then more technical people can pick those up, right? And the ones that want to make a business out of it can do so. That's the idea. Okay, I think it's time to break.